The puzzle of self-reference, exploring the liar paradox. The liar paradox is a well-known and captivating logical and philosophical riddle that examines the concept of truth and how it interacts with self-reference. This paradox arises when statements refer to themselves in ways that result in logical inconsistency. To grasp this paradox, we'll first explore its basic form and the broader consequences it has on our perception of logical systems. At its core, the liar paradox is most famously represented by the sentence, "This statement is false." Analyzing this phrase requires us to determine its truth value. If we take the statement as truthful, then it claims to be false, meaning it must not be true. But if it's actually false, then it's correct in saying so, making it true again. This creates a loop of contradiction, as the statement cannot simultaneously be both accurate and inaccurate. This paradox reveals a critical flaw in classical two-valued logic systems, where assertions are generally labeled as either true or false. The liar paradox exposes the breakdown of such binary frameworks when faced with self-referential statements, whose truth value resists clear classification. The paradox traces its origins to ancient thought. One of the earliest instances comes from the Greek thinker Epimenides, who declared, "All Cretans are liars." Since Epimenides himself was Cretan, his statement becomes self-referential. If what he says is correct, then he is lying, which creates a contradiction. But if he is lying, then his statement must be incorrect, implying not all Cretans lie. This early formulation demonstrates the contradictory nature of self-referencing declarations. In modern logical analysis, the liar paradox is commonly formalized using the clearer phrasing, "This statement is false." This precise version embodies the heart of the paradox and illustrates how circular logic can result in contradiction. It confronts our basic assumptions about truth classification and unveils deeper complications in the groundwork of logical reasoning. Various versions of the liar paradox have emerged to explore different dimensions of self-reference. Consider this variation. This statement is neither true nor false. This twist raises the possibility of a third category beyond the binary of true and false, hinting at the need for alternative logical structures. Another complex form features interconnected statements, each referencing the validity of others, building a web of circular logic that deepens the contradiction. The liar paradox holds critical significance in the realm of logic and formal reasoning. It uncovers the shortcomings of standard logical systems based on binary truth values. By posing a scenario where a statement defies definite classification, the paradox questions whether current frameworks are sufficient to deal with contradictions and self-reference. This puzzle also opens the door to new logical approaches that attempt to resolve such conflicts. Understanding the liar paradox forces us to think about how formal systems might be redesigned to handle circular statements without contradiction. It's a profound challenge that reaches to the core of logical and philosophical inquiry. At its essence, the liar paradox is far more than a quirky brain teaser. It poses a real threat to the very foundations of logic and self-referential analysis. By diving into its implications, we gain a richer understanding of the complex layers that define logical systems and the construction of truth. The paradox reveals major issues with classical logic, especially when it comes to self-referential language. In standard logical theory, every proposition is presumed to have a clear status. Either it's true or it's not. But "this statement is false" doesn't neatly fall into either bucket. If we try to assign it a truth value, we wind up in a logical trap. This exposes a flaw in the belief that every statement must have a definite truth designation. When a statement references itself and causes a feedback loop of reasoning, classical binary logic fails to offer a consistent solution. This flaw suggests that traditional logical frameworks may not be equipped to manage all forms of self-referencing declarations. Beyond logic, The implications of the liar paradox reach into the heart of formal mathematical systems. These systems aim to create dependable rules for reasoning while avoiding contradictions. Yet, the liar paradox reveals cracks in their foundation, especially when circular statements are allowed. One solution proposed to address such problems is the restructuring of logical systems to block paradox-inducing statements. For example, Bertrand Russell's type theory creates a hierarchy where sets exist on different levels, preventing a set from including itself or another set at the same or higher level. This hierarchy avoids paradox by eliminating self-referential loops. From a philosophical lens, the liar paradox also urges us to rethink our concept of truth. It challenges the assumption that all statements can be accurately sorted into true or false categories and pushes us toward more refined approaches. The paradox suggests that traditional truth models may be insufficient for fully grasping the nature of language and reference. When a statement refers to itself, it can create a feedback loop that breaks down traditional comprehension. This impacts how we interpret language, meaning, and expression, requiring more precise tools and theories to navigate these complexities. To respond to the challenges raised by the liar paradox, multiple new logical frameworks have been proposed. One is semantic theory, which investigates how language and meaning can be organized to handle self-reference consistently. Semantic models aim to interpret truth in ways that avoid contradiction while preserving logical integrity. Another innovative approach is dialetheism, the idea that some statements can be both true and false at once. This perspective challenges the binary model and accepts contradiction as a valid part of certain logical systems. By doing so, dialetheism offers a way to embrace paradoxes like the liar paradox without invalidating the system as a whole. The influence of the liar paradox spans both logic and philosophy, pushing scholars to develop more advanced logical structures. It has deepened investigations into truth, circular reference, and systematic reasoning. The paradox acts as a starting point for refining our understanding of logic itself. Moreover, the liar paradox affects more than just abstract thought. It has implications across various disciplines. In computer science, the problem of self-reference arises in recursion and function design. Recursive functions, when not carefully structured with base cases, can fall into infinite loops, much like the logical entanglements of the liar paradox. Strategies such as defining termination points are essential for maintaining functional logic and preventing paradox-like behavior in code. In mathematics, the paradox paved the way for developments like Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which demonstrate that any sufficiently complex formal system contains statements that can't be proven within that system. Gödel's insights mirror the problems raised by the liar paradox, showing that no formal framework can be both complete and consistent. This revelation reshaped foundational mathematics. Linguistics also draws from the liar paradox when studying how language handles meaning. Self-referencing statements force scholars to reconsider how interpretation and semantics function. The paradox motivates theories of meaning that account for circularity and ambiguity in natural language. Culturally, the paradox has inspired writers, artists, and thinkers. Its themes of contradiction, looping logic, and elusive truth appear in literature, art, and science fiction. These representations reveal a broader fascination with the paradox and its symbolic power in expressing the uncertainties of reality. The enduring impact of the liar paradox stretches into computer science, mathematics, linguistics, and cultural theory. It goes beyond theoretical puzzles and reshapes how we think about truth, meaning, and consistency. By confronting the liar paradox, we uncover the depth and limits of traditional logic and push forward into new realms of understanding. The Ship of Theseus, Identity and Continuity Through Change. The ship of Theseus represents one of the most enduring and intellectually stimulating puzzles in philosophy, raising profound questions about the nature of identity, transformation, and the persistence of objects over time. The paradox centers on the idea of gradual transformation, specifically the replacement of parts. If, over many years, every component of a ship is replaced one by one until no original material remains, can we still claim it is the same ship? This seemingly simple question has far-reaching implications on how we perceive the identity and continuity of objects. Named after Theseus, a revered hero from Greek mythology, the paradox begins with the tale of the legendary figure's ship. Upon returning victorious from many heroic quests, including the celebrated encounter with the Minotaur, the Athenians decided to preserve Theseus's ship as a monument to his heroism. Over time, however, the ship's wooden structure began to decay and deteriorate. In response, the Athenians replaced the damaged components, such as planks, masts, and beams, with new materials. Eventually, all the ship's original pieces had been replaced. The key question that arises from this scenario is, after all these replacements, is the ship still the same one that Theseus sailed? At first glance, the answer may seem obvious. The ship is still the same. It maintains its shape, function, and purpose, and continues to be recognized as the ship of Theseus, serving as a symbol of his legacy and a piece of Athenian history. However, the fact that none of its original components remain challenges this assumption. If the identity of an object is tied to its physical components, then how can it still be the same ship if all those components have been substituted? This question leads us to explore the philosophical concept of identity through time, how an object can retain its identity despite undergoing substantial changes. One approach to this issue is to consider physical continuity, the idea that an object's identity remains intact as long as there is some form of physical continuity linking its past and present states. From this standpoint, as the original parts of the ship are replaced, its identity becomes compromised, and it transforms into a different ship. The ship would no longer be the ship of Theseus once every part is new. However, this approach raises additional questions. How many parts must be replaced before the ship ceases to be considered the same? Is there a specific point at which the ship's identity alters, or does its identity change gradually as more parts are replaced over time? These questions expose the difficulty of defining identity strictly in terms of physical continuity. Another perspective focuses on conceptual identity, the idea that an object's identity is not bound to its material components, but instead to its concept or role. According to this view, the ship of Theseus would retain its identity as long as it continues to perform the same function and is recognized by people as the same vessel. In this case, the ship's identity is sustained not through its physical makeup, but through the continuity of its form, purpose, and social significance. This conceptual viewpoint aligns with how we commonly think about identity in everyday life. For instance, consider a museum artifact that has been extensively restored with new materials to preserve its appearance. Even though the materials may have changed, the artifact may still be regarded as authentic because it represents the same historical object. Similarly, the ship of Theseus may retain its identity as long as it continues to be understood as the ship associated with Theseus, regardless of the physical changes it undergoes. However, this raises the question, what exactly do we identify when we say the ship is the same? Are we identifying a physical object, a concept, or something else entirely? If the ship's identity is conceptual rather than physical, does that mean any object could be considered the same as long as it fits the concept of that object? These questions invite deeper exploration into the nature of identity and the role of continuity in maintaining it. The ship of Theseus paradox
becomes even more intriguing when we consider additional scenarios that challenge our intuitions about identity. One such variation involves the possibility of reconstructing the original ship using the discarded parts. Imagine that every plank, mast, and beam replaced on the ship was carefully stored and later reassembled into a vessel. Now, we face a perplexing situation. Two ships exist, one made entirely of new parts and the other composed entirely of the original parts. Which ship, if any, is the true ship of Theseus?
This dilemma introduces the concept of reassembly, complicating our understanding of both physical continuity and conceptual identity. If the ship's identity depends on its original components, the reassembled ship, which uses all the original materials, may seem to be the authentic ship of Theseus. After all, it has the same physical parts as the one Theseus originally sailed. From this perspective, the ship that has been gradually repaired with new parts might be considered a replica or even an entirely new ship, despite its functional and historical continuity. However, the situation is not so simple. If we accept that the reassembled ship is the true ship of Theseus, we face the challenge of explaining why the ship that has remained in use, the one that has been continuously repaired and maintained, is not the original ship. This ship has been preserved with the intention of maintaining Theseus's legacy, continuing to serve as a historical and cultural symbol. Can we dismiss its identity merely because its physical parts have been replaced? The tension between these two perspectives forces us to confront the idea that identity might not be a straightforward concept, but one that can be influenced by context and intent. The reassembled ship, while identical in material composition to the original, lacks the historical continuity that the repaired ship possesses. Conversely, the repaired ship, though preserving functional continuity, no longer shares the same material connection to the original vessel. This leads us to consider the possibility that both ships, in some sense, could be viewed as the ship of Theseus, each representing a different aspect of identity, one tied to physical continuity and the other to functional or conceptual continuity. This dual nature of identity is not exclusive to the ship of Theseus. Similar dilemmas arise in other contexts, particularly in the preservation of cultural heritage. For example, when restoring historical buildings or works of art, we face the challenge of deciding whether to preserve the original materials, even if they have deteriorated, or to replace parts in order to maintain the integrity and functionality of the object. These questions echo the issues raised by the ship of Theseus, highlighting the difficulties of preserving identity over time. The paradox also has modern-day relevance in the realm of technology and personal identity. With advancements in medical science that allow organs, tissues, and even entire body parts to be replaced, we may ask whether a person who undergoes extensive medical procedures remains the same individual. If all of a person's organs were replaced with artificial ones, would they still be the same person? This question is not merely philosophical, but also carries ethical and personal implications about what it means to be human. It challenges us to consider the role of memory and consciousness in maintaining identity. Although the ship of Theseus does not involve a conscious entity, we can extend the thought experiment to personal identity, where memory and consciousness play a crucial role. If the ship of Theseus represents a person's identity, the gradual replacement of parts could be seen as analogous to the physical and psychological changes we experience over time. Does our identity remain intact as we change, or do we become a different person as a result? The reassembly aspect of the ship of Theseus forces us to confront the complexities of identity in a profound way. It challenges us to look beyond mere physical continuity and consider the broader implications of conceptual and functional continuity, as well as the importance of memory, consciousness, and intention in maintaining identity. As we delve deeper into these ideas, it becomes clear that the ship of Theseus is not just a puzzle about a ship, but a rich exploration of what it means to remain the same, whether as an object, a person, or a society. As we continue to reflect on the paradox, it becomes evident that the questions it raises extend far beyond the domain of philosophy and into the realm of practical, real-world issues. One significant area to explore is the relationship between identity and functional continuity. This perspective is especially relevant when considering how the paradox applies in various fields, from legal and scientific contexts to everyday life. In legal contexts, the concept of functional continuity often influences how the identity of objects and entities is determined. For instance, in property law, the identity of an object might be viewed in terms of its function and role rather than its physical makeup. In this case, a historical artifact that has undergone significant restoration may still be treated as the same object legally, even if its materials have been replaced. The ship of Theseus paradox mirrors these legal issues. If a ship is continuously maintained and repaired to fulfill its intended purpose, its legal identity might remain unchanged, even if its parts are entirely new. Conversely, if the original components were reassembled into a new ship, the legal and functional implications of this act would be more complicated. Which ship would be recognized as the legal ship of Theseus, and how would its status, ownership, or historical significance be affected? This paradox also finds parallels in biology and technology. Organisms undergo continuous changes through growth, repair, and regeneration. For instance, human cells are constantly replaced, yet we still consider a person to be the same individual over time. This biological analogy invites us to reflect on how identity is maintained despite the replacement of individual components. In the world of technology, similar issues arise when machines and systems are upgraded. For example, a computer might have its hardware components replaced over time, but it is often still regarded as the same machine as long as it continues to perform its original functions. The ship of Theseus paradox also raises important ethical questions about identity and change, particularly in the context of life and death. As we experience changes in our bodies and minds, what ensures that we remain the same person? This question is central to discussions about personal identity and consciousness. If a person's memories, thoughts, and experiences remain intact despite physical changes, does this continuity of consciousness suffice to maintain their identity? Philosophers have explored various theories to address these questions. Psychological continuity theories, for example, suggest that identity is preserved through the continuity of psychological states, such as memories and personality traits. According to this view, as long as a person's consciousness and psychological characteristics persist, they remain the same individual, even if their physical body changes. This theory provides a framework for understanding how personal identity can be maintained over time, despite the replacement of physical components. Another perspective, known as narrative identity, proposes that identity is not solely tied to physical or psychological continuity, but also to the ongoing narrative or story of a person's life. From this standpoint, as long as the narrative of a person's life remains coherent, their identity is preserved, even if their physical or psychological state undergoes significant changes. The ship of Theseus paradox also extends to cultural and societal contexts. Many traditions, symbols, and artifacts evolve over time. Grandfather paradox, a time travel conundrum. Picture a scenario in which time travel is a reality and you possess a time machine. Eager to explore the past, you decide to travel back in time to meet your grandfather when he was a young man. However, things take a dramatic turn. During your visit to the past, you unintentionally prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, which means your parents were never born, and as a result, you were never born either. Here's the twist. If you were never born, How could you have traveled back in time to interfere with your grandfather's meeting with your grandmother? If you didn't exist, you wouldn't have been able to create this situation in the first place. This creates a paradox, a logical contradiction, because your actions in the past seem to erase your own existence. This scenario is known as the grandfather paradox, a famous problem in discussions about time travel and causality. The paradox challenges our understanding of cause and effect, raising profound questions about the consistency of time and the potential to alter past events. To visualize this paradox, consider the following. If you could go back and change events in such a way that you prevent your own existence, you'd be creating a situation where you couldn't have made those changes in the first place. The cause, your time travel, contradicts the effect, your existence. The grandfather paradox isn't just a theoretical dilemma, it has significant implications for our understanding of time travel. If time travel were possible, it could lead to contradictions and complex issues related to causality and the flow of time. This paradox raises essential questions about the very nature of time and reality itself. What does this mean for the possibility of time travel to the past? Can such paradoxes be avoided, or are they inherent to the process? One common response to the paradox is the theory of parallel universes, or alternate timelines. According to this idea, if you were to travel back in time and alter events, you'd create a new parallel timeline where your actions would prevent your own existence in that specific timeline. However, it wouldn't affect the original timeline from which you came. In this scenario, time travel results in the creation of branching timelines, each remaining consistent within its own reality. By doing so, the grandfather paradox is avoided because changes occur in separate realities rather than altering a single fixed timeline. Another theory that attempts to resolve the paradox is the concept of time loops or closed time-like curves. This suggests that events in the past are part of a closed loop, meaning any actions you take while traveling back in time are already accounted for in the timeline. In essence, you wouldn't be able to change significant events because they are already integrated into the timeline. This theory resolves the paradox by asserting that the timeline is self-consistent, and while your actions may seem to contradict the possibility of your existence, they are simply part of a larger, unchangeable loop of events that disallows contradictions. The grandfather paradox also forces us to rethink our understanding of time and causality. It challenges our intuitive notions of cause and effect, and compels us to reconsider how we view the flow of time and the potential for altering the past. The paradox is not merely a philosophical puzzle. It has real-world implications across various fields, including physics, philosophy, and even popular culture. In physics, the paradox raises questions about the consistency of physical laws and the feasibility of time travel. While some theories, such as Einstein's theory of relativity, suggest time travel may be theoretically possible, they also imply constraints that could prevent paradoxes like the grandfather paradox from occurring. For instance, some physicists argue that conditions such as the need for infinite energy or the existence of closed time-like curves may make paradoxical events impossible. Philosophically, the paradox challenges our views on determinism and free will. If time travel were achievable, it would prompt us to question whether our actions are predetermined, or whether we have the freedom to change the course of events. The paradox pushes us to grapple with the implications of altering the past and the potential consequences for our understanding of reality. In popular culture, the grandfather paradox has inspired numerous works of fiction, from books to movies, all exploring the complexities and consequences of time travel. These portrayals often delve into the paradox in creative ways, providing insight into potential solutions and the challenges time travel could present. Looking to the future, the grandfather paradox remains a valuable thought experiment. It offers profound insights into the limits of our comprehension of time and reality. While time travel remains theoretical, the paradox highlights the challenges and limitations that would arise if such phenomena were ever possible. In conclusion, the grandfather paradox is a captivating puzzle that prompts us to reassess our understanding of time, causality, and the very nature of reality. By exploring the paradox and its broader implications, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexities tied to time travel and the profound philosophical questions it raises.